Hi, welcome back to Power of Storytime. I'm Kate, the creative director of Calling Card Books and Z Girls Press, and every Wednesday at noon Pacific time we read from one of our books. Today we are continuing from Finding the Lost, and we are lucky enough to have the author Michael Foster with us again. Thanks for joining us, Michael.
Thanks for having me. Good to see you.
Yeah, so we wanted to talk today a little bit about stories that you love. You mentioned a couple of them in the book itself, but what were some of your favorite books or your favorite book series as a kid?
When I was really young, my parents would read this Old Mother West Wind fables to us, and they always featured talking animals, talking rabbit, or talking squirrels, and they always took place. All the characters were all these creatures and stuff. So I always loved those, but then growing up, definitely I mentioned the, I just drew a complete blank on it, but, A Wrinkle in Time.
Oh
and
yeah,
that
that's a
whole
great
series. And then I loved scary stuff, and there's a series of books called the Dark is Rising series from Susan Cooper, and I found those really compelling. Again, they're similar to A Wrinkle in Time, that it involved a family of children. I guess in Narnia that way too.
one. Oh yeah.
That had to fight witches and things like that, and it was just kind of that was really exciting. And then, as I got a bit older, I started reading the Xanth series from Piers Anthony. That just a whole bunch, did a huge series of fairly light fantasy books that took place in the world of Xanth, which really got me more into fantasy and also science fiction.
Yeah. Now that you're an adult, have your tastes in books changed a bit from when you were younger?
Yeah. I can't get into nonfiction that well. People always recommend nonfiction books. And I guess because I live in a world of nonfiction, though sometimes it seems crazy enough it's straight out of a sci-fi movie.
Yeah. We're all in a dystopia now.
That when I jump into reading for pleasure, if I'm reading nonfiction, it feels like homework.
Yeah. So you're into more of like an escapist kind of feeling when you're reading.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I enjoy a lot of horror novels now, and definitely a different. I write for a different audience than the type of books I read. Though there may be some elements coming into book 3 that are a little horrific.
Oh, that's intriguing.
Of course, I'll keep it light and make sure to keep my audience in mind, but it could be a little scary.
Well, that would be fun.
Exciting.
Yeah. No. When you say horror, is it like a Stephen King kind of horror, or like more like a psychological thriller? I mean, I guess maybe his is too.
Well, yeah. I mean, I enjoy Stephen King. I especially enjoy otherworldly type horror books, or things that are kind of Lovecraftian, but with modern writers. I recently read a fantastic book. It was a little bit horror, but a little bit fantasy, called The Library at Mount Char by Scott Hawkins, that I found extremely compelling. Super fun book. And then another one called The Fisherman by John Langan. It's one of the best books I've read in the past decade. That one was kind of this dark, brooding, Lovecraftian story that went places I didn't expect it to go. That just I loved the imagery in that book so much.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
So definitely, if a book can provide a really great level of imagery that really makes me feel like I'm there, then that's the best.
Yeah, it's really great when a book is very immersive and creates a world for you. And I had a question about that too. Like you have a very dynamic world in the wild side, and how much of like the world building to create that takes place before you start writing, and how much of it happens kind of in the moment as you're writing?
It definitely, it mostly happens on the fly. I try to, I'm taking the journey at the same time that I'm writing the journey. And as I'm writing, I am Alicia. And when anything that happens, I always think, okay, what would I do in this situation? And there's a moment coming up in Finding the Lost, I don't believe you reached it there, where she takes a small detour. And I hadn't planned for that detour at all to happen until I'm writing that part of her journey, and I suddenly thought, you know what I would do? I would do this if I were there. And so then I had to write that scene, which actually led to a big moment, and an exciting moment, and scary moment that I hadn't planned for at all. So that was really fun. It just happens on the fly.
Nice. Is it ever tricky writing from Alicia's perspective? Because since she's a little girl, it's a little bit different. Or are you able to kind of tap into watching your daughter grow up and pull from that to kind of figure out how she would think?
I tap into that a little bit. I try to write her in a non-gender way. That, you know, the things she does, the adventures she goes on, anybody could go on and have those adventures. And but then there are moments that are maybe a bit more emotional, or with her relationship with her father. And I try to draw on memories for those of how I saw my daughter behave in this or that situation.
Yeah. And that's one of the things that kids really like. Both boys and girls were able to really identify with her. So you have made her very accessible to everyone, that's great and hard to do, but you did it well. And so last week, Alicia was kind of in a precarious situation. She crossed the tree bridge to get towards Thunderbolt, and it was a little dangerous. She nearly fell off. And as a self-proclaimed free-range child, have you ever been in any sort of sticky situations as a kid, like out in the wild when you were exploring?
Not necessarily dangerous, but I definitely got injured a lot. It seemed like every summer I would end up needing stitches.
Oh no.
I spent a lot of time in the closest hospital to our cabin getting stitches. It was almost an annual thing. I would just throw myself into everything, probably a little bit more clumsily than I should have. But that scene of her crossing the log, that was actually inspired by my very first trip up the mountain Thunderbolt. And we reached a point where there was a lot of snow. And the snow banks were coming up close to the edge of a stream that we had to cross that was flowing pretty good. The snow melt was going. This little river was flowing pretty well, but there was a fallen tree across it, and it was pretty wide. So we just kind of used that fallen tree as a bridge across this stream to get to the other side to continue the hike up. And that moment was always really memorable for me. I think I was probably about Alicia's age when I did that, and while it wasn't necessarily scary, I think the tree was wide enough that it didn't feel like I had to really maintain my balance. It was fairly easy to walk across, but it was just a moment that always stuck with me. And then as I was writing her journey up Thunderbolt, I remember that moment and thought, I want to include this in some way.
Nice. Was it as kind of dangerous as a drop as what's described in the book, or is that kind of something you've taken some liberties?
Yeah, maybe 5 feet down into the water, but it would have been cold, icy water that I fell into. there was a lot of rocks. It could have been dangerous. I could have gotten hurt.
Yeah. A lot of problems you can run into there.
I just extended the depth a little bit. I kept the river. It's just out of sight now in Finding the Lost. It's a pretty deep canyon there.
Yeah, that comes across pretty harrowing, especially the part where she starts to slip a little bit and nearly falls off. It's one of those like nail biters. I forgot how stressful that is, but I was getting secondhand stress just reading it. And you've kind of mentioned that a couple of the things, like the bridge, which I didn't realize was inspired by a real thing, but in the last passage we read, Alicia is hiking up to Thunderbolt, and she remembers the watchtower and the bridge from her own world, but they aren't there in the wild side. Are those based on real things as well? And do you have experiences there yourself as a kid or with your family?
Yeah, that watchtower is there, and you can see it from kind of anywhere around the lake. It's super tiny, you have to look closely, but you can see, oh, that's square, so it doesn't look like a tree. So that's the watchtower. And both times, I guess I've made that hike 3 times now, and all the times there's been somebody up there, and they're just so excited to have anybody come visit them, because
gotta get a little lonely.
Stuck up there in that watchtower watching for fires, and I don't know, how long at a time one person has to be there, but I think it's a couple of weeks.
Oh wow!
At a time, as they swap out personnel, and so they were just super thankful for anybody to be coming visiting them, and do you want a mug of coffee or some hot chocolate or something like that? Yeah.
That's great. Yeah, that's such a sweet detail in the story, them going up there and having cocoa with the ranger or whoever's keeping the lookout.
It's a real thing.
Yeah. And does the bridge exist as well, or is that
Bridge does not.
Does not. Oh, okay. Well, it's a good setup for the tree bridge that comes later. It's It's fun. All right. Cool. Well, I know you've got a lot of work today. Do you have enough time to read with us for a little bit, or do you need to get back to?
I would love to. You might hear this pinging coming over the over the microphone. Those are emails I'm getting.
Oh.
I forgot to shut my email down to keep that from pinging, so I apologize for that. But no, I've got some work things I've got to get back to. Looking forward to vacation this summer.
One question, what is that behind you?
Oh, yes.
Well, that is Gloria Miller-Allen's drawing of my actual cabin. And that is taken from book 1. And I was really excited to be able to add that as my backdrop today. I don't know how well you can see it, but...
Oh, that's fun. It's kind of moving with you as you move around, so we got to see a bit more of the cabin in the trees.
Yeah, and a little bit on the other side, so, yep. I just love it. This is one of my favorite pictures from the book, because it really captures the look and feel of the cabin in the woods. It's an incredible place, and I'm hoping I'll be able to get there this summer. It just depends on what's happening with the virus and what's happening with work and everything. So,
well, hopefully you'll get a chance to go back and see it, because it really is a special place, and it's inspired a very special series.
I love it there.
Yeah. All right. Well, I guess we'll go ahead and get to reading. Thank you so much for joining us again this week, Michael.
Thank you as always for having me.
Great.
I enjoy being here, and you always surprise me. I never know what you're going to ask. If anybody wonders if these questions are discussed ahead of time, they're not. And I'm having to, they're putting me on the spot, and I have to think, okay, what was that about?
Got to keep him on his toes. Yeah, I keep trying to come up with new ones, because we've asked you quite a lot, and I want to keep them fresh, but yeah.
All right. Well, everybody enjoy the reading, and hope to see you next week.
All right. Bye, Michael.
Bye-bye.
All right. So, last week, as we mentioned earlier, Alicia is on her journey to go find the ancient Thunderbolt who's at the top of the mountain, and she's been camping. Oh yes, here we have the... So she started off at Moose Beach, and she is working her way up to Thunderbolt, and she will continue her journey on later. But she had to do a very perilous crossing across a tree, and when we left off, she had just made it across safely after nearly slipping and falling to her doom, and now she is dedicated to making it to Thunderbolt to ask him for help freeing her parents. All right. So now we're going to read Chapter 8, Thunderbolt. The sky grew dark as Alicia approached the last section of her hike. The final half-mile or so of trail became quite steep, and she did not want to attempt this part at night. Quickly, she set about searching for a clearing well suited to build another camp. She found a decent spot with relatively flat ground and enough trees surrounding the area to provide some shelter from the wind that had picked up over the past few hours of the climb. She removed her equipment and went about the task of gathering stones and wood. Alicia kept scanning the forest worriedly. The memory of those yellow eyes staring into hers had not left her. And to make things worse, she heard the sounds of stealthy movement throughout the day, but did not see a sight of the cougar. However, she felt reasonably comfortable that the beast stayed behind when she began to climb the mountain. The sky continued to darken as she worked, and once again, Alicia saw the mysterious floating lights that she had seen the previous night, this time seeing faint colors in the lights, soft shades of very pale reds, blues, and greens, among others. Still, she had no idea what they could be. But despite being intrigued, she turned her attention away and continued preparing camp. She vowed to research the lights as soon as she got back home with access to her books. She had one in particular that told of all the wildland creatures, and she was sure she would find the answer to the curious lights there. Alicia quickly assembled a fire, pulled the blanket from her pack, and settled down in front of the glowing flames to soak up the heat, which at the moment only reached her extended hands. The wind blew, and each gust brought a chill from the approaching storm. Alicia was thankful she had decided to bring a blanket and wrapped it around her slim shoulders. She passed a stream along the way. Let me make sure. She passed a stream along the way. Its water had crashed down the mountain like a freight train, and there was no way to see a fish hid in the froth. She had been unable to do much more than fill her water bottle, meaning that she had to make do with more jerky and trail mix for dinner. Digging into her backpack once again to get the food bags that found their way to the bottom, she took out the beef jerky that remained and turned back towards the fire, and found herself staring directly into the eyes of the cougar, standing on the other side of the flickering fire. Its head held low, watching her, unblinking, the rising flames of the blaze dancing in its eyes. Just as the previous night, the teenager froze in place, not daring to move. The great cat remained motionless as well, as the firelight played along its flank, highlighting the short, dusty yellow fur. Alicia realized with panic that this night she had no fish to share. They stayed that way, eyes locked, unmoving, as seconds ticked slowly, endlessly by. Alicia was terrified, but for some odd reason, she did not feel threatened by the cat. Oh, she knew it could easily kill her quickly, painfully if it chose to. But somehow she got the sense that it wouldn't. She felt her muscles relax and reached slowly into the bag of jerky, fingers blindly searching for and finding one of the bigger pieces. Those large, bright eyes tracked the motion of her hand with interest. Alicia gently withdrew the chunk of dried meat, and with as little movement as possible, tossed it in the direction of the cougar. It landed in the dirt with a soft thump. The cougar's eyes quickly darted towards the meat and then back towards the girl, but remained motionless. Alicia reached into the bag again, taking out a smaller piece of jerky and raising it to her lips, biting into the tough meat, then chewing. The cat watched her for a moment longer, then lowered its head towards the chunk of meat, resting near a huge paw. It sniffed the piece, then gave a huff, sending a small cloud of dust swirling away from the jerky. The cat took the meat between its teeth, turning its head back towards the girl as it briefly chewed, then swallowed the treat. Alicia took this moment to study the cougar more closely. The cat looked lean, but not skinny or undernourished. It had fur that almost matched the color of its eyes. She could see the play of strong muscles along its flank. This beast was powerful, of that she was sure. She decided the cat was female. To her, all cats were feminine, and a quick, somewhat embarrassed glance underneath its backside proved her right. Alicia began to think of the cat as a her rather than it. The cat had 2 parallel lines carved through the fur on her neck, where hair no longer grew. Alicia wondered what happened, thinking to her encounter with a group of foxes 3 years ago that had left a small, thin scar along the back of her leg. "How did you get that scar, you with the tawny eyes?" she asked quietly, almost a whisper. The cougar continued to look at her. "I'm sorry, I don't have any fish tonight," she said. Alicia reached back into her bag of jerky and tossed another fat piece towards the large cat. This time, the cougar caught the piece of meat out of the air, bringing a small smile to the girl's lips. "You're not going to hurt me, are you?" she asked softly, hope in her voice. "That's all I can share tonight. I have to save the rest." The cat remained still, silently looking at her. After a moment, the cougar slowly blinked her golden eyes, turning away from the campfire, and the girl, disappearing into the darkness. "Goodbye, Tawny," Alicia whispered into the night. The only reply was the returning music of the crickets. Alicia had less difficulty falling asleep that evening. She felt slightly safer after this latest encounter with the powerful cat, feeling sure the cougar meant her no harm. She didn't know exactly why she thought that, she didn't know exactly why she thought that, and wondered if she must be crazy for thinking so. She didn't plan on snuggling up to the cougar that night or any time soon, but did feel reasonably confident that the large cat was not going to kill her while she slept. The way the cat blinked those huge yellow eyes at her before leaving reassured her. Alicia had seen house cats do that when they felt comfortable around a person. Was it any different here? Other than this cat having 3-inch-long murder talons, she didn't think so. With this thought spinning through her head, Alicia laid down, wrapped the blanket more tightly around herself, and drifted off to sleep. Strange dreams of falling through a cloud of growing lights and calling for Fiona to stop her descent racked her sleep. She landed softly in a huge field of flowers and felt a malevolent presence nearby. The large cat suddenly appeared from nowhere to stand over her. Saliva dripped from its bared teeth, landing cold on her cheek. The dream startled Alicia awake, and she found that first light had come. With it, so had the rain, spattering lightly on her face. Alicia quickly broke camp, and even though the rain had started, still went through the ritual of ensuring the fire was completely extinguished. Her parents ingrained fire safety rules in her, since she was young enough to understand. There was so much life to be lost in the forest. Trees, flowers, grasses, animals, even people and pets too. So she took the task seriously. Sure that the fire was dead, Alicia popped some trail mix into her mouth, crunching on the variety of nuts and dried fruit. She put the bag of food away, shouldered her backpack, once again stowing her spear under the straps. She looked up the trail, remembering that this had been the most difficult part of the hike when she came with her parents. Sighing heavily, she pushed the wet hair from her eyes. She set off up the mountain, the final stretch of this journey. The climb was as bad as she remembered, worse because of the rain. With a quarter-mile left, it got so steep it was almost vertical. She fell into rhythm. Step, 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 pause. Step, 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 pause. Over and over, her leg muscles burning from the exertion. She used the walking stick for leverage to help pull her up the last few feet. She could see the top now, surrounded by dark thunderclouds. She was almost there. Approaching the peak, Alicia could make out the roof of the cabin, or hut, through the driving rain. That had become a serious downpour. The rumble of thunder filled the sky and carried across the lake valley below. The sound had not quite faded when another louder boom cracked above her, chasing the first. As she slowly crested the rise, more of the cabin came into view. Alicia squinted her eyes and peered at it. The shack was small and disheveled, and the roof sagged into the rest of the building. It looked like nobody had lived there in a very long time. Suddenly, A tremendous flash of light speared down from the black clouds, striking the cabin's metal chimney. Sparks flew everywhere, and the concussive force almost knocked the young girl off her feet. Alicia scampered behind a tree and shouted towards the collapsing building. "Hello?" she yelled out, hearing nothing. "Hello?" There was only silence in the return and steady beat of rain. She stepped cautiously from behind the tree and stood on the peak with her hands on her hips, looking across the vast landscape. Even though through the falling rain, she could see the opposite end of the lake sprawled below, ringed by soft, round mountains. If she looked carefully, she could almost see exactly where her cabin would be in her world, right on the small point that stuck out from the shore on the far side. Cupping her hands around her mouth, Alicia screamed at the top of her lungs. "Hello!" The sound carried out through the storm, and she could hear it echoing around the valley below. However, only silence came from the small hut behind her. She sat on a large boulder, letting her backpack and spear fall soaked to the ground, and started out towards the empty space before her. Her shoulders slumped, and her hair hung down around her face in long, wet strands. What was she to do now? The Ancient One wasn't here, and she had been counting on his help. Sure, there were two more beings out there, Vulcan and Silver King, but if Thunderbolt wasn't here, why should she believe the others were still around? Alicia felt lost. The great responsibility of what she was trying to accomplish came crashing down on her. Her parents were trapped, and she didn't know if there was any way to save them. She had convinced herself that she would find answers here atop this mountain. It was almost as if she had been called, and hadn't she? Alicia thought back to several nights ago in the cabin when she had awakened from a dream, the voice lingering in her head. "Come find me." That's what it had said, right? The memory was foggy now, but she was sure it had been something like that. Well, here she was. She had come to find who? Alicia looked back towards the small cabin. Maybe there were answers within. Maybe she could find some clue to where the Ancient One had gone. Standing up, she brushed off the back of her wet jeans and walked towards the house, watching the dark sky carefully. The door was barely attached, with rusty hinges and an old beaten door handle. It didn't look safe to enter, but she had to try something. Suddenly, the small door to the cabin burst open, and out strode a man of tremendous height. "Who is doing all the yelling out here and disturbing my sleep?" he boomed. "Oh," he said with a small start of surprise. "It's you." Alicia was taken aback by the banging of the door, but now she looked at the man. He was tall, at least 6.5 feet, maybe even 7. He stood there dressed in what looked like old bedclothes, as disheveled as the cabin he called home. His hair was long and gray, hanging just below his shoulders. He had a thick mustache, but no beard. He had bare legs and wore no shoes. The man sort of looked like a cowboy from the Old West, but without the horse, boots, and spurs. Strangest of all was that he seemed to recognize her. "You know who I am?" Alicia asked curiously. "Well, of course I do, Alicia. I've known you for a very long time." The man stepped forward, his bedclothes flapping behind him as he approached the girl. "You saved this realm. You did what you were born to do. And now you're back. Why are you back? Your role is done. It ended long ago." Alicia was confused by this barrage of statements, trying to sort them out in her head as the man spoke quickly. Wait. You've known me for a very long time? How did you know I saved this realm? And how could my role have ended long ago when I was only here 3 years ago?" She paused her questions for a moment to take a breath before continuing. "And I need to know, are you the ancient known as Thunderbolt?" "All good questions. But one at a time," he chided her, placed his arm on her shoulder, leading her back towards the boulder where she had been resting. Gently, he guided her to a sitting position and settled himself on the ground, his head now level with hers. The man raised his face to the sky and waved his hand. The rain stopped immediately, as if turning off a kitchen faucet, and the dark clouds slowly dissipated into the atmosphere. Lowering his head to look the girl in the face, he smiled and said, "My word, you really have grown. But you're still quite young. There's so much potential. He paused, continuing to look at her. Alicia squirmed under his scrutiny. Yes, child, I am Thunderbolt. So we finally met the first of the three ancients, Thunderbolt. So now it's chapter 9, Confession. Alicia breathed a huge sigh of relief. She'd done it. She'd found Thunderbolt. All of the questions and fears that had swirled around her mind over the past few days all tumbled out in a rush. Oh my goodness, Mr. Thunderbolt, sir. I came here looking for you. My family, my parents are stuck in this, I don't know, some sort of weird invisible bubble. They're frozen and not moving. The words came flowing through her mouth like water. I tried to save them, I smashed the bubble with the biggest rock I could hold over and over until my hands bled, but nothing happened. She paused for a moment. A small sob escaped her throat, like the low bark of a dog. It's not just them. There are bubbles everywhere. I don't know how many, and I don't know why. My only thought was that maybe I could find the answer here, find a way to save them. Alicia looked at the ancient one in front of her. My hope was that you could save them. She finished looking deflated after the rush of words. Thunderbolt looked at the girl, his eyes filled with sadness. Oh, child, I have no real magic left, and the little that I have is just enough to keep me alive year after year. But I just saw you do magic, she insisted. I saw the rain and clouds disappear. The ancient waved his hand dismissively. Tricks, nothing more, simple spells and illusions to keep others away and protect my solitude. He raised his head towards the lake, and beyond, just to the south, his gray eyes looking weary. Our magic was depleted. Most of what I regained I gave to you centuries ago. Gave to me? Alicia asked, confused. You gave nothing to me. We've never met. You are correct, child. We have never met, he said, continuing to stare into the distance. But still, I gave you my magic. Can't you feel it? Sense it in you? It called you here long ago. You called me here? She asked, confused by the answers. Yes, he replied. Only you had the power to stop Grand Tree. You were needed, and you came. You did exactly what we expected. You defeated the greatest threat this realm has ever faced. Thunderbolt looked back at Alicia. But that was the last of it, the last of my true magic. I have waited here for centuries, waiting too long for it to come back to me. But there's nothing. It's in you now. It's a part of you. My magic is yours. But how could you have waited for centuries? She asked. You only called me here 3 years ago. Alicia, he said, looking into her eyes, over 4,000 years have passed since you set foot in these lands. Alicia stared at the ancient in shock, her mouth agape. She couldn't think straight. Her mind was all jumbled. Trying to process this information after a minute or two, she blurted out, What do you mean 4,000 years? It's only been 3. I was 11 the last time I was here. Ah, but you see, child, time works differently between the two realms. You should very well know. Answer me this. How long did you stay in the wild side when you were last here? Alicia thought back, trying hard to remember. I don't know exactly. It was so long ago, but several nights passed. Might have been as long as 2 weeks. And when you returned, how much time had passed in your world? Alicia thought hard. She remembered facing Grand Tree, the rain pouring down around her. She turned away from the great tree and saw her dad there, kneeling in the grass and dirt. Had he waited there for 2 whole weeks? No, that didn't make sense. Wait, that's right. He thought she'd only been gone for a little while, that she was playing some sort of hide-and-seek game. When she tried to explain what had happened to her father, he brushed it off like it was a make-believe fantasy, scolding her for hiding when they were trying to beat the rainstorm home. Realization slowly dawned on Alicia. The ancient was right. Time did work differently here. What had only been a moment for her father and her world had been days, maybe weeks for her in the wild side. And now she was 3 years older. Had 4,000 years really passed in this realm? She could hardly believe it. No wonder everything looked so overgrown and different when she crossed the barrier. But that meant she thought of her friends, Mickey, Fiona, and Briar. Now she understood why she had not seen them. They would all be dead now, wouldn't they? Gone to dust many generations ago. The thought saddened her, but she knew that was the way of things. She believed they had remained friends throughout their lives, different and unique. Yes, definitely argumentative at times, but still friends. She knew in her heart it was true. At least she understood why they were not here to greet her, and she didn't feel quite so abandoned. With that realization came a sudden idea. Do you think that is why my parents are trapped? Do you think that maybe the differences in the way time works cause this? Maybe somehow your time has leaked across the barrier into my world, creating those bubbles or whatever they are. You could be right, child, Thunderbolt agreed. Maybe Grand Tree's great roots pushed against the barrier, weakening it over the years. After you faced him, he withered from the loss of water. His roots grew smaller as well. Perhaps when they withdrew, they left behind gaps in the barrier. He mused. Today the tree is a shriveled husk of his former self. They are alone in the meadow where it all started. What do you mean, where it all started? Alicia questioned. Where what started? Thunderbolt heaved a sigh. I guess it's time the story was told. Some of it you may already know, but not all of it. Not our worst sin. So listen, child. Listen and remember. A massive meadow blanketed the wide-open space filled with grasses and wildflowers of all colors. A gentle summer breeze flowed through the valley, carrying across the meadow all the great varieties of scents from the many blossoms. In this field no trees had ever grown, for the roots of the flowers choked the life from any new sapling that tried to sprout. A more beautiful location could not have been chosen. It was here, this untouched place, that the three beings met. They came together to privately discuss the threat of humankind. Individually, their magic was strong. The charge of lightning held by Thunderbolt, the blazing heat that belonged to Vulcan, and the very power of the earth possessed by a Silver King. Combined, their powers could alter the very fabric of time and space. They agreed that they must do something if this world was to survive, so they worked great magics, combining earth, fire, and lightning, understanding that doing so would weaken them immensely. Strained and sweating, each of the ancients reached deep inside themselves, amassing a strength not seen since the creation of the world. The power of their combined strength tore apart the very sky itself. A ripping sound filled the air, echoing across the mountains and through the canyons, like the rending of the largest bedsheet in the world right down the middle. Even though it was clearly afternoon, the stars appeared briefly in the heavens above their group before walls of daylight came crashing back together and clouds filled the sky. Powerful shock waves radiated from a single point where the trio gathered, vibrating every living thing like a plucked piano string. Rain poured down, dousing them in a deluge of cold water, as if God himself desired to wash away this offending, abusive power. When the vibrations stopped and the thunder faded away, a heavy silence descended on the land. As the rain continued to fall, they looked at one another, tired and slumped from the effort. Thunderbolt, Vulcan, and Silver King knew they had severed the world of magic from the world of humans, never to mix again. They had succeeded. Let humankind destroy their own world, they said. In time, this realm would heal. Without another word to each other, they turned and left, returning to their own domains to rest and recover. When we left the meadow that day, never knowing what a terrible being our forces had created, Thunderbolt paused, remembering back. You see, born on those beautiful summer winds that smelled so gloriously of flowers, he continued, had been a tiny seed never seen by any of us, though truly, even if we had looked, we would not have paid attention to it. After all, seeds are common in these wooded lands. What was one more? But this seed, you see, was special. The seed landed just so, right in the center of our group, as we talked and debated, and the winds danced around us. The once majestic Thunderbolt looked terribly sad, his bedclothes hanging loosely on his frame. And when we finally wrought the powerful magics between us, it was right on the spot where that seed lay. That very seed absorbed a great deal of the magic. Alicia listened, knowing what was coming next, but not wanting to hear it. That seed, that unassuming little seed, sprung from a simple-looking pine cone, from a nondescript tree not so far away. The magic, our magic, gave this seed strength. It drank down so deeply from the rain that poured down. Water, the additional missing element to our own of sky, fire, and earth, sped the growth in ways we could not have known and could never have imagined. Its roots were bigger and stronger than the flowers that normally sucked all the nutrients from the ground. Thunderbolt breathed deeply, gathering the courage to continue. And so, in our desire to rid the realm of humankind, we created a monster even more terrible. Uncaring, unknowing, just existing, surviving at all costs. We created Grandtree. Alicia closed her eyes and bowed her head, the weight of this revelation sinking in. She recalled the previous Halloween when she had watched an old black-and-white movie with her father called Frankenstein. It was about a doctor trying to bring the dead back to life, trying to control the power that was reserved only for God. The monster he created was childlike, not understanding why he existed. In the end, the villagers, fearing what they did not know, killed the monster. Alicia remembered crying and feeling sympathy for the creature, who never had the choice to live again and was now condemned to die. She thought of the great tree. Unlike Frankenstein's monster, his understanding had grown over the ages, so that by the time she met and spoke with him, he knew what he was doing, and he just didn't care. She felt no sympathy for him. He deserved to be destroyed. She looked back up into the storm-gray eyes of Thunderbolt. "You believed yourself gods," she said quietly, with an almost scolding tone to her voice. "You tried to shape the world to your own vision, and in the process almost lost everything. You may have power, but you are no gods." The man looked exhausted from the telling. "You are right. We stepped beyond our bounds, and these lands paid the price. If we had only waited a moment longer, perhaps we would have seen the seedling sprout and grow so unnaturally," he said with regret. "But I believe we were all ashamed in some way of what we had done. Standing there looking at each other, we saw that shame reflected in each other's eyes. So we left without speaking, never spoke again until..." Thunderbolt paused in the telling. "Until what?" Alicia questioned. "Oh, child, there's so much you don't know yet. We tried to make it right, at least some of us did. You have magic within you, so much potential," he replied. He said, repeating the words from earlier. Thunderbolt looked at the girl a moment longer, and then stood and turned away, walking slowly back to the dilapidated hut. "Where are you going?" Alicia called to him. "I need your help." "You came to the wrong place, child," he said, not turning around. "I have no more help to give, child, and no more desire to talk." The shame of his story had slumped his frame to the point where he appeared almost a foot shorter than he had when she first saw him. "But I need you! What about my parents?" She yelled at his back, anger and frustration pouring through her words. "And I have so many questions." The being paused, turning back towards her. He said, "Go see Vulcan. My story is done. I no longer have the strength or energy to help you with this matter. I have given you my protection. I can give you nothing more. Go to Vulcan. Maybe there you will find the answers you seek." With that, the great Ancient of Thunder turned away. Pulling open the rickety door of the cabin, he went inside. Her last image of him was of a gnarled hand reaching back to pull the door shut. And then Thunderbolt was gone. So, we've met the first Ancient Thunderbolt. He was a little bit disappointing. But next week we will continue reading Finding the Lost, and we will probably be meeting Vulcan, the next of the Ancients, and finding out a little bit more about this mysterious tale. So, we hope you've enjoyed it. Join us again next Wednesday at 12 p.m. Pacific Time. And In the meantime, if you want to watch any earlier episodes or read from this or any of our books, if you go to callincardbooks.com/power of storytime or Michael Cavan's books, you can read either of his books there and purchase them as well and read a little bit more about Michael. Please check that out. We're so glad you joined us again this week. Have a great one.